Today I'm going to be talking about how to care for the purple passion plant, and I know a lot of you do enjoy this plant. It's also known as Gynura Aurantiaca. I'll put the name on screen because it's a bit of a mouthful, but I've had this plant for probably almost a year. So I've kind of experimented a little bit, and so I thought I'd share kind of what my findings are. First of all, the care you give your purple passion plant is going to vary a bit depending on your environment. So depending on how hot it is, how much sun you get, where you are in the world, that kind of thing. So do bear that in mind. Basically, as a general rule, the amount of water that your plant needs and how often it needs it, I should say, depends on your temperature and how much light the plant is getting. So if your plant is getting low light and it's cold, it would need watering less often. And then if it's really hot at the other end of the scale and you're getting loads of really bright light, it's going to need watering more often. So I always say to check the soil before you water. Because it can vary so much, I can't really say to you, oh, water once a week or something like that, because it really does depend on your environment and what time of the year it is and all that kind of thing. So if you're unsure as to whether your purple passion plant needs watering, just use one of those moisture meters. I use them all the time, and you just put it down into the soil and it will tell you whether the soil is moist or dry. Now, I try to keep mine moist because this plant doesn't really like to dry out all the way, so I wouldn't let it dry out. Having said that, if you do let it dry out, it's not going to die on you, but you might just have like some crispy edges or something. But if you can, keep it lightly moist but not wet. You don't want to keep it really, really wet. So kind of let the top of the soil dry out a bit, but not all the way. And then when it comes to light, this plant does like bright indirect light. It can actually take a little bit of direct sun too, although I would be very careful with that, especially if your plant is not used to direct sun. Just acclimate it gradually, you know, bring it a little closer each day. But I find that they can withstand a little bit of direct light. Bright indirect light is the ideal kind of light for these plants, but they really do like a lot of bright indirect light, so try and give it a really nice bright spot. They also respond really well to grow lights, so if you have a grow light or you want to invest in one, you can get them quite cheaply these days, and I've found that this one does grow a lot better when I put it under a grow light compared to when I had it in my window. I used to have it in my kitchen window and it didn't grow all that fast. This year I experimented by putting it under a grow light, and it's definitely growing faster. So that's something to bear in mind. Definitely the light level you give your plant will affect how fast it grows. When it comes to your potting mix, I personally like to use a mix of coco coir, orchid bark and perlite, and I like to mix those together to make kind of a well-draining soil mix. Again, what you have in your soil will affect how often you water. So for example, if you just have pure soil without any drainage materials, it's going to hold that water for a lot longer, so you're going to have to water less often. But I would definitely recommend putting in some drainage materials like perlite, orchid bark, pumice, that kind of thing, just because it helps the plant to not stay wet for too long. It helps with the drainage, because as with all plants, of course, they are at risk of root rot if their soil stays wet for too long. So I definitely recommend putting a bit of perlite or orchid bark or something in there. And I'd say if you've just got one of these and you're not quite sure yet and you're a complete beginner, just test the soil a little more often than you usually would to start with. This is generally what I do when I have a new plant and I'm not sure how often it needs watering, because as I said before, it really depends on what soil you have, what time of year it is, how much light it's getting, etc. So I'd recommend that when you first get the plant and you haven't got used to its care, test the soil a bit more often just to be sure, and then eventually, of course, you'll get your groove on, so to speak, and you'll learn how often your plant wants watering and how that relates to your conditions and your environment. When it comes to pests, I personally have never had pests on this plant, thank God, But of course it could happen, and you should definitely check for pests. You can check the backs of the leaves too. This one does have purple backs on the leaves, so that kind of makes it a little bit easier for me to check for pests because they would show up fairly easily. Definitely no signs of pest at the moment, but definitely keep your eye out for pests as you would on any plant. I have heard that these don't like getting wet, the leaves don't like getting wet, but of course if you're going to treat for pests you're probably going to have to get the leaves wet. So I'd say if you do get pests and you do end up having to spray down those leaves, just make sure you don't put the plant in a sunny spot whilst it's still wet. Yeah, try and let it dry off first. But yeah, I've never actually had pests with this one, touch wood, but I guess you just treat them in the same way you would any other pest. I don't know how this plant responds to things like pest spray because, as I say, I've not had that experience yet. If you know a bit more about this, let us know in the comments because, yeah, that's something I haven't come across with this particular plant yet. But definitely be vigilant, keep your eye out for pest damage and signs of pests on there. When it comes to fertiliser, I fertilise this one the same as I do my other plants, usually every other watering, so probably roughly about every 2 weeks in the spring, summer. And then during the winter months when it's cooler, I stop fertilising because it generally doesn't really grow much during the colder months. So I also would mention that it's important during the winter months when it's colder to cut back on your watering. It's going to need far less water. The frequency at which you water your plant will come down, and so you do need to be aware of this as the seasons change. When it's hot, it's going to need watering more often. When it's cold, it's going to need watering less often, and it's really important to cut back during those colder months because the plant is not using as much of its resources to grow, so it doesn't necessarily need as much water, and they are a little bit more at risk of root rot during winter. I've had quite a lot of root rot dramas during winter because I've gone a bit overboard on the water. So again, definitely monitor your soil, but don't be afraid of letting it dry out just a little bit more during winter. I never let mine dry out completely, but I might let it dry out kind of 3/4 of the way a bit more during winter, but definitely not in summer. I will, you know, keep it lightly moist in summer. So a few more things to mention about this plant. It is also known as the velvet plant, and it's actually green in colour, but it has purple hairs. And yeah, so when you move it around, you kind of see different colours on it. The other thing to note about this is that it is a vining plant. So at the moment you can see mine is fairly small and it's still fairly compact. When the vines reach about 1 foot long, that's when they start to trail. So it will probably grow upwards until it gets to about 1 foot long, then it will start to trail. So you've got two options. You can either have it as a hanging plant at that point, or if you prefer a more compact look, you could always take some cuttings and replant them back into the pot, or propagate them first and then replant them. But it's really up to you as to what you would like to grow your plant like. Personally, I'm aiming for the trailing version, but yeah, that's up to personal preference. When it comes to how easy it is to get hold of a purple passion plant, that's going to depend obviously again on where you are in the world. Here in the UK, it's fairly easy to get hold of. I don't see it a great deal in garden centres, but you can order it online pretty cheaply, so definitely have a look online. But yeah, other than that, I would say just have a look in your garden centres to see what they're stocking. Go on a regular basis because they're always stocking different things on different days. So I like to kind of leave it a couple of weeks or a few weeks and then go back and see what else they've got, because they're always getting new stock and you never know what you might find. But yeah, if you really want it and you don't want to wait, you could always just look online at a shop that's local to you. But here in the UK at least, it's really cheap to get hold of, and I wouldn't be afraid of buying a small one too, because it grows so fast, so you don't necessarily need to be buying a large plant. I really hope you found today's care video useful, and I also have a video on propagating this plant which I will put up here for you if you're interested. And yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.